Chapter 101, Arrival of the Blood Cloth Sect. Immense pain. When Lin Dong's body hopped into that area where two large crystal millstones interacted, a massive unstoppable force immediately enveloped his body. Due to that terrifying force, Lin Dong immediately lost control of his body. Then, he started to sense that his body was breaking apart inch by inch. When his body broke down, an unspeakably immense pain swiftly followed. The two giant crystal millstones continued to rotate at a slow and steady pace, as if nothing in this world could stop it. Lin Dong's body was completely powerless in the face of the crystal millstones. The intense pain caused his body to tightly curl up. Visible cracks could be seen all across his body as sections of his skin split apart. While experiencing that immense pain firsthand, Lin Dong finally understood why the small Marten had looked at him in a peculiar manner when it heard that he wanted to use these mind millstones to train his mental energy. It was because the pain was at such an intense level. Lin Dong tightly gritted his teeth as he utilized every ounce of his energy to maintain his last sliver of consciousness, preventing himself from being drowned by the flooding pain. Ka ka ka. As he forcefully hung on, more cracks began to emerge on Lin Dong's body. Moments later, his body vibrated violently before it actually exploded and turned into numerous mental spots. His mental body was forcefully blown to bits by the mind millstones. Just as Lin Dong's mental body was blown apart, a white light suddenly emerged from the two crystal millstones and wrapped itself around the mental spots. A trace of Lin Dong's consciousness was floating in these mental spots. Hence he could sense the presence of a mysterious energy contained within that white light. Thanks to that energy, those mental spots that were scattered actually started to converge towards his consciousness. Buzz buzz. As more and more mental spots began to gather, Lin Dong's mental body was actually restored. When he witnessed this scene, a look of awe surfaced in Lin Dong's eyes. However, before he could find the time to marvel at this miraculous mind millstones, the immense pain that was enough to drive a man crazy attacked once again. Boom! A distance from the crystal millstones, the small Marten watched Lin Dong's mental body being forcefully blown apart again as a hissing sound involuntarily left its lips. With its paws in front of its chest, his attitude was nonchalant and akin to watching a show. Hee, Grandfather Marten wants to know how many times can that kid endure. Previously, when the stone talisman was in its hands, it had also tried to utilize this so-called mind millstones. Even till now, that intense pain caused some of its hair to stand on end. Though that object could indeed boost one's mental energy, it was not something that any ordinary man could endure. Under the faint glow of the space, the two crystal millstones continued their slow rotation at a steady pace. As they rotated, streams of terrifying energy were poured into the youth who was standing at the intersection of the millstones. Bang! Bang! A soft explosion sound caused by the eruption of the mental body echoed across the area. However, each time this sound echoed out, the small Marten's paws would tremble. The crystal millstones slowly rotated as it continued its never-ending cycle. Below the crystal millstones, a powerless figure utilized all his determination as he was continuously blown apart and reformed time after time in order to strengthen himself. The eighth time. Unknowingly, the slightly sadistic glint in small Marten's eyes had dissipated as it stared at that youth in awe. It could clearly feel that the latter had already passed his breaking point and he was only holding on through sheer willpower. Bang! Another clear and loud echo reverberated about the space. The awe in small Marten's eyes grew thicker. However, the awe in its eyes slowly turned into a serious expression after another echo sounded out after a long while. 10 times. Lin Dong had endured 10 cycles of being exploded and reformed again in the crystal millstones. This kid is truly tenacious, the small Marten lowered the claws in front of its chest. For the first time, it realized that the boy had something that made him stand out from the masses. While the small Marten sighed in its heart, an almost transparent figure slowly floated out from the crystal millstones before it stopped in front of the former. That extremely weary face was indeed Lin Dong's. Right now, even though Lin Dong had left the mind millstones, he could still feel remnants of the intense pain inside his consciousness. Not bad, kid. You managed to endure 10 cycles on your first attempt. As it looked at the feeble Lin Dong, the small Marten smiled as it said. Lin Dong barely managed to return a smile. However, even though he felt extraordinarily weak and exhausted, he could faintly sense that right now, his mental energy seemed slightly more potent than before. Looks like these crystal millstones would really help boost one's mental energy. Right now, you have reached your limit and should not train any further. It's best to return home and rest. Besides, Grandfather Marten suggests that you procure some mental energy nourishing elixirs, as it would greatly amplify the effects of your training. If not, your mental energy may be damaged due to poor health, and this may lead to problems in the future. The small Marten casually muttered. Yes, thank you. Lin Dong earnestly nodded his head. Although this small Marten's origins remained a mystery, it seemed very knowledgeable. Therefore, it was only sensible to heed to its advice. The small Marten waved its paws. Without further ado, it immediately turned into a flash of light and disappeared into the darkness. Lin Dong did not seem to mind. With a nudge of his consciousness, he left this spiritual domain. Inside his room, Lin Dong opened his eyes and felt a pang of dizziness set in immediately. Shaking his head, he let out a bitter laugh. Even though his physical body did not incur any damage during that training, his mental energy was severely strained. As he gently sighed, a strand of Lin Dong's mind slipped into his Nuan Palace, only to see that his destiny soul symbol was now eerily dark. However, its form seemed to have solidified slightly. It seems like that was the result of his prior training inside the mind millstones. Indeed, I will need some elixirs that can rejuvenate my mental energy in order to maximize my training. Let me see if I can buy some elixirs in the next few days. When he saw this scene, Lin Dong thought to himself as he nodded his head. Then, he stretched his body, feeling the weariness set in, before he fell asleep almost instantaneously. In the following days, Lin Dong practically entered the stone talisman spiritual domain daily to utilize the mind millstones to temper his mental energy. Even though the training was truly torturous, right now, this was Lin Dong's only way to swiftly boost his mental energy. With regards to the elixirs that could rejuvenate one's mental energy, it was truly too rare. Even though Lin Dong searched the entire Qingyang town bazaar, he could at most procure 2 grade 2 elixirs. Nonetheless, it was still better than nothing. As Lin Dong tirelessly trained, 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these 7 days, Lin Dong's mental energy training made good progress as his destiny soul symbol increasingly materialized. In fact, it now looked like a symbol with substance. However, there was still quite a way to go for him to advance to the second seal symbol master level. Fortunately, Lin Dong had already expected this outcome. After all, if it was so easy to advance to second seal symbol master, then symbol masters would be worthless. While Lin Dong was training, the Lin family began to secretly transfer some younger generation members away in order to safeguard against the worst-case scenario. As days passed, the atmosphere in the Lin family grew increasingly tense. Meanwhile, the rest of the factions in Qingyang town also began to turn their attention towards the Lin family. Some of them were delighted at their misfortune, some of them were worried for them, while others were merely casual observers. In a forest deep within the Lin family estate, Lin Dong's tightly shut eyes slowly opened. With a flick of his mind, a materialized spirit needle swiftly formed in front of him. The current Lin Dong had completely mastered this so-called materialized spirit needle. However, this was merely an ordinary secret spirit skill. Therefore, its power was not truly astounding. It's been 10 days. As that materialized needle began to dissipate, Lin Dong's facial expression turned increasingly serious. In these 10 days, thanks to that mind millstones, his mental energy had grown tremendously. However, he had yet to become a second seal symbol master. According to Lin Dong's prediction, with the help of the mind millstones, he would need another 2 to 3 months' time before he could advance to the second seal level. Yet, time was now of essence. If he failed to advance to the second seal level, he could never hope to match up against Wei Tong, who was at advanced Yuan Dan stage. I must think of a way to delay them. Lin Dong softly sighed. This critical situation caused him a major headache. Just as Lin Dong sighed, he suddenly felt the ground began to tremble slightly. Promptly, his facial expression changed. As his toe pushed off the ground, he immediately leapt to the top of a nearby tree before his mental energy began to spread out. His fist abruptly clenched tightly. Within Lin Dong's area of perception, a sea of red suddenly began to emerge just outside of Qingyang town's entrance. Like a typhoon, they seemed extremely formidable as they swept towards the Lin family's position. Blood Cloth Sect. As he stared at the army of red-clothed murderous troops, Lin Dong softly sighed. They had finally come. The Blood Cloth Sect has arrived. Lin family members, prepare to die. As that giant army charged towards the Lin family, a fierce shout echoed out with the aid of a thick Yuan power. Like a thunder, it rang clearly in the entire Qingyang town. TLN, we've decided to adopt a more understandable ranking for the Yuan Dan stage, credits to the commenter in our WDQK World page. Initial Yuan Dan stage. Initial Yuan Dan stage. Yuan Dan small full circle. Yuan Dan advanced. Perfect. To make things clear, both Lin Zhentian and Lei Bao were at the initial Yuan Dan stage while the new character, the head of the Blood Cloth Sect, is at the advanced Yuan Dan stage. Chapter 102, Wager. As that thunderous and menacing roar spread across the bustling Qingyang town, the entire town turned silent. Promptly, countless gazes were directed towards the Lin family residence. The Blood Cloth Sect has finally arrived. The Lin family is really plagued with misfortune. After they handled the Lei and Xie families, another more vicious wolf arrived. Sigh. All around the Lin family manor were red-clothed troops. They were so numerous and tightly crowded together that not even a trickle of water could seep through. That piercingly bright red color and their menacing aura was truly a sight to behold. At the head of the group was a man seated upon his horse. This man was fairly muscular and his skin was quite tanned. As he stood quietly, he looked akin to an iron tower. Meanwhile, a suffocating atmosphere slowly emitted from his body. Anyone could tell that this man was not to be belittled. The man was dressed in red robes and wore an ice-cold expression on his face that was not the slightest bit readable. His fiery red eyebrows caused him to look even more menacing. This man was the head of the Blood Cloth Sect, an advanced Yuan Dan stage expert that was fairly renowned even in Yan City, Wei Tong. Beside Wei Tong was a rather scrawny elderly man. Judging by the faint Yuan power undulating around his body, this man should be the member of the Blood Cloth Sect that had reached initial Yuan Dan stage. Hehe, our Blood Cloth Sect has personally arrived to your doorstep. Yet a small Lin family has chosen to shut us out. Do you really think that our Blood Cloth Sect will hesitate to destroy you? That eagle-nosed elderly man released a weird laughter as he glared at the Lin family's manor, a vicious expression on his face. Creak. After that man laughed, the tightly shut gate of the Lin family manor slowly began to open. Soon after, a large group of Lin family guards gushed out as they stared nervously at the massive formation in front of them. This elderly Lin Zhentian, patriarch of the Lin family, greets Master Wei Tong. Lin Zhentian led Lin Xiao and the rest out as he clasped his hands and greeted the red-robed man on horseback. I did not expect to see an initial Yuan Dan stage practitioner in this tiny Qingyang town. Wei Tong's cold gaze was fixed onto Lin Zhentian. Soon after, he waved his hands and said, "My Blood Cloth Sect's motive should be clear to your Lin family. Gu Ying was the deputy head of my Blood Cloth Sect. Since he died at the hands of your Lin family, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, evil for evil and blood for blood. You should know what to do." Lin Zhentian's expression slightly changed as he gritted his teeth and replied, "Master Wei Tong, that day, it was mainly a dispute between my Lin family and the Lei and Xie families. Deputy head Gu Ying was the one who interfered. I did not come here to listen to an explanation of what happened." Wei Tong interrupted in an indifferent manner. Soon after, his gaze became even icier as he glared at Lin Zhentian and said, I've said it before, I am here to avenge him. Thus do not bother to explain these details to me. Wei Tong's tone was rather flat and controlled, but within that tone, was a wild aggressiveness. With regards to this, many of the Lin family members felt rather indignant, yet, they did not dare to voice out their grievances. Lin Zhenqian's facial expression fluctuated. Moments later, he replied in a low voice, Master Wei Tong. Please get to the point. What should my Lin family do in order to resolve this issue? Blood Cloth sect had utilized all their troops on this trip. However, they only surrounded the manor and did not begin their attack immediately. Their actions evidently hinted that they had other designs. Lin Zhenqian was a wise man. Hence, he naturally guessed that the Blood Cloth sect was definitely planning to take advantage of them. You are a wise man. When he heard Lin Zhenqian's words, a smile finally emerged on Wei Tong's face. His pearly white teeth caused everyone to feel a chill. Hand over the steel wood manor and Gu Ying's murderer, then, if your Lin family submits to my Blood Cloth sect, I can forget about Gu Ying's matter. When they heard these words, Lin Zhenqian's and the rest's hearts sunk. They expected the Blood Cloth sect to rip them off, however, they had clearly underestimated their appetite. Master Wei Tong, could you be slightly more gracious? Lin Zhenqian's voice sounded somewhat dry as he asked. Heh, Lin Zhenqian, don't push your limits. Our master has already shown extreme gracefulness when he did not immediately destroy your Lin family. If you continue yapping, your Lin family will be completely erased. Beside Wei Tong, that elderly man with a cruel look somewhat condescendingly said in a high-pitched voice. The real reason why you guys did not straight away exterminate our Lin family was because you guys understood that there will be a hefty price to pay. Before that elderly man's words could fade away, a voice subsequently echoed out. Promptly, a figure darted out from the Lin family and landed on the manor wall. This person was Lin Dong. You must be that Lin family boy who killed Gu Ying. Wei Tong's eyes immediately fixed onto Lin Dong. The former's eyes slightly narrowing, a cold glint emerging as he slowly said. You overestimate your Lin family. Master Wei Tong, believe me. If we really fought, our Lin family will most likely be destroyed. However, the elderly man beside you will probably die here as well. Competition in Yan City is fierce. If you were to consecutively lose your right and left-hand men, I think it will be a major blow to your Blood Cloth sect. Lin Dong stared at Wei Tong as he solemnly said. You. When he heard these words, that sinister-looking elderly man was enraged. Just as he planned to shout, Wei Tong waved his hand and halted him. Promptly, he chuckled, So boy, according to you, our Blood Cloth sect will not dare to do anything against your Lin family. If your Blood Cloth sect wishes to destroy my Lin family, you could certainly do so. However, there will be a hefty price to pay. Surely Master Wei Tong must know this as well. Besides, even if you could destroy our Lin family today, I am confident that I can escape. In the future, Master Wei Tong will perhaps have countless sleepless nights. Lin Dong's gaze met Wei Tong's as he said. Oh! Wei Tong was shocked as he stared at Lin Dong. In the next instance, a cold murderous glint flashed in his eyes. He heavily stomped the ground and like an arrow, he dashed towards the ladder. Boy, do you think that you afford to be so arrogant in front of me just because you killed Gu Ying? If you hope to escape, I shall kill you right now. Wei Tong's actions had gone against everyone's expectations. Nobody anticipated that the head of the Blood Cloth sect would actually suddenly attack a youngster. Lin Zhenqian quickly regained his wits. Immediately, his eyes reddened. Yet, just before he could intercept Wei Tong, that sinister-looking elderly man appeared in front of him and blocked him. Clang clang! This sudden development caused troops on both parties to immediately draw their weapons. Instantly, the atmosphere turned extremely tense, both parties on the brink of a fight. Lin Dong calmly looked at Wei Tong, who was now menacingly dashing towards him. The latter's reaction did not surprise him. However, he did not plan to fight with Wei Tong right now. After all, he knew that based on his current strength, if he fought directly, he did not stand a chance against an advanced Yuan Dan stage opponent. Therefore, when Wei Tong dashed over, Lin Dong's body also swiftly floated backwards. Then, several black shadows flew out from his sleeves. However, these black shadows were not directed towards the former, but rather Lin Dong's feet. As he gently tapped off with his toes, he soared into the air. After several jumps, he actually forced his way into the skies. This scene caused several people in the surroundings to gasp. Walking through the skies. Even an elite Yuan Dan stage practitioner could not accomplish this feat. Lin Dong leaped in the skies and easily avoided Wei Tong's offensive. Meanwhile, the latter had no choice but to stop. With a dark expression on his face, he finally understood why Lin Dong could confidently claim that he would be able to escape. If he utilized this method, it was indeed true that no one could obstruct him. When Lin Zhentian and the rest saw Lin Dong using this method to render Wei Tong helpless, they heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. Lin Dong's figure slowly landed onto a nearby tree. He looked down from above at Wei Tong and said, "Master Wei Tong, if your blood cloth sect destroys our Lin family, I will escape and train in secret. However, while I am training myself, your blood cloth sect will perhaps feel very worried. You dare to threaten me?" Wei Tong's extreme anger turned into laughter. This was the first time he was threatened by a youth. However, ultimately he felt a little troubled. After all, he could not easily brush this threat aside. The fact that Lin Dong could kill Gu Ying at such a tender age was testament to his immense potential. Against such an opponent, he must quickly dispose of him. If not, he would be a major threat in the future. Lin Dong was calm. Right now, his Lin family was unable to contend against the blood cloth sect. Similarly, no one in his Lin family could beat Wei Tong. Therefore, he could only utilize this method to somewhat restrain Wei Tong. "Master Wei Tong, do you dare to have a wager with me?" Lin Dong suddenly asked. "What wager?" Wei Tong's eyes slightly narrowed as he sneered. "In 3 months, we shall have a death match. If you win, not only will the Steel Wood Manor be yours, but all our Lin family members will also submit to you. However, if I win, then we shall forget about Gu Ying's matter. How about it?" Lin Dong slowly said. When Lin Dong finished speaking, several people were shocked. Even Lin Zhentian's and the rest's facial expressions changed slightly. They turned and looked at each other but were at a loss for words. After all, if they could not survive today, then the entire Lin family will be ruined. At that time, the Steelwood Manor would be completely worthless to them. If they were able to delay them for 3 months, that would definitely be a positive development. As to whether Lin Dong could really defeat Wei Tong in 3 months, perhaps only he himself knew. "You wish to have a death match with me?" Wei Tong was evidently startled by this wager. Although Lin Dong had killed Gu Ying, that did not indicate that he had the qualifications to match up against him. Advanced Yuan Dan stage could match up against a third seal symbol master. Third seal symbol masters was a rarity even in Yan City. He absolutely refused to believe that Lin Dong could reach this level. "I wonder if Master Wei Tong dares to accept." Lin Dong smiled. "Boy, you are just trying to buy some time, right?" Wei Tong chuckled. Lin Dong declined to comment as he stared at Wei Tong and said, "You have 2 choices, you can get our Steelwood Manor and our entire Lin family to submit to you without suffering any losses. Or, if you choose to fight now, our Lin family will battle fiercely against you, and finally, I will escape." When he heard the last 3 words, Wei Tong's face involuntarily twitched. These words were typically an embarrassing admission, however, when Lin Dong seriously said them, it caused Wei Tong to be slightly troubled. After all, this was indeed the scenario that he dreaded the most. He was willing to pay the hefty price in order to destroy the Lin family. However, he was afraid of a venomous snake lurking in the dark. Especially since this venomous snake was extremely talented. This would cause him countless sleepless nights in the future. If he wants to exterminate them, he must thoroughly destroy them. When one wants to get rid of weeds, one must completely remove all roots. However, the current him was not fully confident that he was able to remove this root, Lin Dong. Wei Tong's eyes rapidly flickered as he carefully weighed his options. When they saw his expression, everyone else quietened down. All their gazes turned towards Wei Tong. His decision today will determine whether they will be a massive bloodshed or whether they will choose to retreat. Master Wei Tong, what is your choice? A long while later, Lin Dong softly asked. Wei Tong slowly lifted his head as he stared daggers at Lin Dong. Promptly, he chuckled. With a flick of his body, he immediately jumped back onto his horse. Fine, I shall accept his wager. However, 3 months is too long, I shall give you 2 months. In 2 months, we will have a death match in Yan City's duel arena. I will be waiting for you there. However, over this period of time, your Lin family is forbidden to leave Qingyang town. My spies from the Blood Cloth sect will be constantly monitoring you. If you dare to leave, my Blood Cloth sect will massacre every one of you. Let's go. That Wei Tong was a decisive man. With a shout, he turned his horse around and left. Leading the pack, he headed towards the outskirts of Qingyang town. Behind him, the rest of the Blood Cloth sect troops also transformed into a tidal wave as they swiftly followed. As he stood atop the tree, Lin Dong gazed at the rapidly departing troops. His facial expression slowly turned solemn. 2 months. In 2 months, he must reach the second seal symbol master level, or else a great catastrophe will befall his Lin family. Chapter 103, Temporarily Leaving. Rumble. Outside of Qingyang town, a red river that gave out a menacing aura swiftly flowed by, causing dust clouds to form in its wake. Sect leader, that boy is clearly stalling for time. What need was there to agree to his wager? At the front of the group, the sinister-looking elderly man was somewhat unsatisfied as he glanced at the town behind them while talking to Wei Tong who was beside him. The Lin family's strength had somewhat exceeded my expectations. An initial Yuan Dan stage plus a young symbol master who could have possibly reached the second seal level. If they really went at us with their lives on the line, even if our Blood Cloth sect could exterminate the Lin family, we would pay a huge price. Wei Tong had a chilly expression on his face as he icily said. Currently, our Blood Cloth sect is contesting for territory with the Iron Mountain sect. It would not be worth it for us to sustain too huge a loss here. It just so happens that I can settle the Iron Mountain sect matter in these 2 months. At that time, how can the Lin family possibly escape? In addition, that boy needs to be killed. Or else there will be no end to our troubles in the future. From that short exchange previously, I can tell that although I am able to defeat him, he also has the ability to escape. If by any chance the scenario he spoke of played out and he finds a place to hide himself to train in secret, we would never again rest easy. That boy knew this, thus he dared to suggest this wager. The elderly practitioner furrowed his eyebrows and said, however, is sect leader not afraid that the situation might turn for the worse over this period? If we let him escape, then the situation will be even more unfavorable. A cold light shimmered in Wei Tong's eyes. Moments later, he chuckled and said, do not worry, when the time comes, it would not be easy for him to escape from the duel arena using his mental energy. Without this card, he is fated to die. And once this brat is dead, won't the Lin family and the Steelwood Manor be free pickings? Sect leader is wise. Upon hearing these words, that elderly man also laughed as he buttered up Wei Tong. Wei Tong smiled. Without further words, he raised his horsewhip and led the huge group as they rushed back to Yan City. Dong Yar, are you certain of beating Wei Tong 2 months later? In a room within the Lin family estate, Lin Zhenshan's gaze was fixed onto the youngster who stood in the rear as he asked, a tinge of worry in his voice. I will have to try. Lin Dong did not give an overly confident answer. An advanced Yuan Dan stage expert was no small fry. Sai, you did not do anything wrong. If things did not go this way today, the Lin family would definitely be unable to avoid disaster. Lin Zhentian smiled bitterly as he sighed. The Blood Cloth sect had mustered a humongous force today. If it were not for the fact that he had already successfully advanced to initial Yuan Dan stage and the matter of Lin Dong killing Gu Ying. Even with Lin Dong's witty words, they would be unable to avoid a complete extermination. 2 months, to one side, Lin Xiao and the rest had complicated expressions on their faces as they secretly sighed. During these 2 months, I will stop training and instead concentrate on refining 2 pure yuan pills for Dong Yar. Lin Zhentian muttered to himself for a while before he finally declared. Pure yuan pills. After hearing these words, Lin Xiao and the rest were slightly shocked. The so-called pure yuan pills were actually condensed from the highest purity yuan power in a yuan dan stage practitioner's body. It was similar to pills and were termed pure yuan pills by the masses. This item had a huge effect on one's cultivation and was many times stronger than yang yuan pills. However, condensing a pure yuan pill was also far more difficult than a yang yuan pill. It is said that only those practitioners who had reached yuan dan stage had the ability to compress yuan power into a pill. Even so, they still needed a rather long time to do so. For someone like Lin Zhentian who was currently at initial yuan dan stage, condensing a pure yuan pill would probably take about a month. Furthermore, during this month, his cultivation progress would become very minimal. After all yuan power that he took in would be compressed into a pill. Where would he find any more yuan power for his personal absorption? Yet, though there was quite a cost to bear, this pure yuan pill had a rather substantial effect on cultivation indeed. Think about it, a whole month's worth of yuan power a yuan dan stage practitioner usually uses for cultivation. Even if one was unable to fully absorb all of it, it would likely still be worth at least 10 days of tough training. Thus, the price of a pure yuan pill was crazily high. 1 pure yuan pill could probably be exchanged for 100 yang yuan pills. This means that a yang yuan pill was worth 1,000 yang yuan stones, practically half a month's haul of the current Lin family. However, because condensing pure yuan pills consumed too much time and energy, unless one really needed to exchange it for some item or was in a dire need of money, most yuan dan stage experts did not find the prospect of creating a pure yuan pill from the yuan power in their bodies very appealing. This was also why Lin Xiao and the rest were surprised when they heard Lin Zhentian was planning to give up 2 months of cultivation to instead condense pure yuan pills for Lin Dong. There is really no loss for me to give up these 2 months of cultivation. I've only just recently advanced to initial yuan dan stage. It would probably take at least a few years before I can reach advanced yuan dan stage. Since this is so, why shouldn't I assist Lin Dong in his training? His potential is after all in a different league when compared to this old sack of bones. Lin Zhentian waved his hands and said. As Lin Dong gazed at the old man's face, warmth blossomed in his heart. Yet he still shook his head and smiled. Grandfather, there is no need. I plan to go to Yan City during these 2 months. Yan City. Upon hearing these words, Lin Zhentian and the rest were startled. Yes. Lin Dong nodded his head. He currently needed too many things. Although the effect of utilizing the mental millstones to train his mental energy was not bad, he lacked mental energy recovery elixirs. These type of elixirs were rarely seen. In a place like Qingyang town, it was very difficult to obtain. Therefore, he had no choice but to leave for Yan City. As long as you possessed sufficient funds, you would be able to obtain most of the things you needed there. Elixirs, secret spirit skills, secret arts, martial arts, and much more. Of course, on the condition that you had enough Yang Yuan pills. With regards to Yang Yuan pills, Lin Dong had made extremely ample preparations over this period. After all, the fact that he was guarding a vein of Yang Yuan stones combined with the refining efficiency of the stone talisman, it would be rather difficult to stay poor. Of course, these were all due to the stone talisman, thus he did not reveal any of it to Lin Xiao and the rest. Even though the current Lin Dong had a gift for mental energy, the secret spirit skills that he practiced was limited to the materialized spirit needle he obtained from Gu Ying. As for secret arts, it was even more embarrassing. Qing Yuan art was completely unable to satisfy his cultivation needs. These things needed to be replaced and Qingyang town was clearly unable to provide what he needed. You've already grown up and can make your own decisions. Since you are going to Yan City, you should have already made your own plans. This old sack of bones has nothing more to say except that you need to remember that Yan City cannot be compared to Qingyang Town. You need to be especially careful there. When do you intend to leave? Lin Zhentian muttered to himself for a while. In the end, he did not object. I will leave tomorrow. After all, I only have 2 months. Lin Dong chuckled. Okay. Lin Zhentian lightly nodded his head and took out a low-grade Qianqun bag. Due to the Yang Yuan stone mining lode, they had now started using these things which they had seen as luxurious in the past. There are 100 Yang Yuan pills in here. It could be considered to be the entire savings of our Lin family over this period. Take it, in Yan City, you can do nothing without Yang Yuan pills. When he saw the Qianqun bag that was being handed over and the earnest expression in the old man's gaze, Lin Dong's nose felt slightly bitter. These 100 Yang Yuan pills were an enormous sum to the Lin family. In the past, they would have to sell off a few of their manors before they could gather such a sum. Grandfather, don't worry. I will not let the Lin family be ruined at the blood cloth sect's hands. Though Lin Dong's secret personal funds were ample, he knew that he could not reject this bag, or else Lin Zhentian and the rest would not let him go to Yan City alone. Thus he immediately received it and softly replied. Lin Zhentian chuckled as he patted Lin Dong's shoulders. Then, he suddenly said, don't carry too much on your shoulders. Remember, if you feel that you are still unable to match up to Wei Tong after 2 months, ignore the wager. As long as you live, there will be hope. A moment of integrity does not make you a hero. Lin Dong silently nodded, the fists within his sleeves slowly clenching tightly. If he did not go, the Lin family would definitely face a calamity. Over this period, our Lin family had also established some bases in Yan City. If there are any problems, go to those places. Your father will fill you in on the details later. 2 months later, we will also go to the Yan City duel arena. Like I said before, if you are not certain, don't appear. As long as you live, vengeance will always be possible in the future. Lin Dong quietly listened as he gazed at the old man who had suddenly become quite naggy. In the end, when the old man felt somewhat tired, he waved his hand and everyone slowly left the room. The next day, Lin Dong led a horse out of the Lin family estate's main entrance. He did not intend to bring anyone else along and even little Flame was temporarily left behind in Qingyang town. Over this period, he did not plan to let anything hinder his training. Lin Dongji, take care. At Lin Dong's side, Qing Tan's eyes were somewhat red as she looked at the former and softly said. Lin Dong smiled and rubbed Qing Tan's tiny head before lifting his own to look at Lin Zhentian and the rest who were standing at the entrance. Grandfather, father, let us meet again in 2 months. After saying these words, he no longer tarried and straight away mounted the horse. Raising his horsewhip, the two transformed into a cloud of yellow dust as they swiftly galloped away from Qingyang town. Gazing at the back of the youngster who was swiftly disappearing into the distance, Lin Zhentian and the rest sighed. Now, they could only pray in their hearts that Lin Dong would be able to achieve sufficient progress to contend against Wei Tong within these 2 months. Chapter 104, 1000 Gold Auction House. It was already afternoon by the time Lin Dong reached Yan City. After entering the city, he found a secluded inn to rest and in the meantime, took the opportunity to ask around about the various happenings in Yan City. After all, since he was new, Lin Dong was generally not familiar with the city. Within a room in the inn, Lin Dong sat on the bed with his eyes tightly shut. A long time later, he slowly opened his eyes as a pale shade of white colored his face. Just before this, he had entered into the stone talisman spiritual domain and utilized the mind millstone to cultivate his mental energy. Even though he had experienced that intense pain multiple times, it was still extremely unbearable for him. Lin Dong removed a jade bottle from the Qianqun bag nestled on his lap. Within the jade bottle was a pale white pill. It was refined from the elixirs he had purchased in Qingyang town and had a slight restorative effect on his mental energy. However, as he had already consumed several of them and this was his last remaining pill. Looks like I'll have to go to the 1,000 gold auction house tomorrow to see if I can find some mental energy recovery elixirs. As he gazed at that lonely pill, Lin Dong softly sighed. It was rather easy to find ordinary elixirs, yet this type of mental energy recovery elixirs were extremely rare. He had thoroughly searched throughout Qingyang town, yet he only managed to find a meager few. Furthermore, their quality were all rather low. The 1,000 gold auction house Lin Dong had mentioned was the biggest auction house in Yan City. This auction house was owned by one of the top 3 factions in Yan City, the 1,000 Gold Association, and its scale and reputation was on a completely different level from Qingyang town's bazaar. He would surely be able to come across some of the elixirs that he now urgently needed there. With these thoughts in mind, Lin Dong lightly exhaled before lying down to sleep. The next day, Lin Dong got up very early. He slightly tidied himself up before exiting the inn and made a beeline for the 1,000 gold auction house at the center of the city. The 1,000 gold auction house was famous not only in Yan City, but even in the entire Tiandu province. After wandering around for half a day, Lin Dong finally arrived at the vicinity of the 1,000 gold auction house. When he first caught sight of the 1,000 gold auction house, Lin Dong could clearly feel its majestic atmosphere. Compared to this, Qingyang town's bazaar was indeed too shameful. The densely packed crowds looked like ants as they constantly streamed into the 1,000 gold auction house. Such a formidable popularity was comparable only to the time when the Qingyang town hunt was held, and even so, the latter would still find itself lacking. Lin Dong stood outside the auction house and rubbed his face, trying hard not to let himself look too much like a country bumpkin. Finally, he laughed at himself before he squeezed his way into the crowd, walking towards the inner part of the auction house. The 1,000 gold auction house was split into outer and inner sections. Though the outer section was the largest, the items exchanged there were not considered very valuable. This was because most of the better items were auctioned off in the inner section. Of course, one would require substantial funds to successfully bid and acquire one's desired item there. Lin Dong walked about in the dazzling outer section of the auction house. Here, even a grade 4 elixir was not considered rare. As for elixirs with mental energy recovery properties, Lin Dong also saw a few. However, most of them about grade 3 quality. If it were the past, this kind grade 3 elixir with the ability of recovering mental energy would be a passable find and be put to use. However, time was a rather pressing issue for Lin Dong now. Swiftly reaching the second seal symbol master stage was his highest priority. Therefore, the elixirs that he chose needed to be as good as possible. And so, after taking a stroll around the entire outer section and not finding any elixir of interest, he straightaway headed towards the inner section of the auction house. At the entrance of the inner section of the auction house, Lin Dong was stopped by a guard. After being informed by the latter that he needed to hand over 10 Yang Yuan stones, Lin Dong's face involuntarily turned black. A 10 Yang Yuan stone fee just to enter, this 1,000 gold association was truly outrageous. After cursing in his mind, Lin Dong had no choice but to pay 10 Yang Yuan stones. Only then, did the guard withdraw. Just as Lin Dong planned to enter, a sudden disturbance was suddenly heard from behind. When he sensed this disturbance, Lin Dong could not help but somewhat curiously turn his head. Soon after, a path opened up in the crowd as a few figures appeared in his sights. Among these figures, there was one which was particularly attention-grabbing. Naturally, it was a woman dressed in a red gown. Her skin was white as snow and on her peach flower-like face, hung a graceful and magnanimous smile, an especially touching sight. She looked no different from a woman at the prime of her youth, yet her ample curves and graceful posture caused her to give out a mature charm that captivated others. To her side, a tall woman clothed in green followed. This woman was also extremely beautiful. Like the former, she had an extremely beautiful face, however, she seemed a little more indifferent than the former. Therefore, in comparison, she seemed a little unripe. Nonetheless, she had a distinct aura and definitely surpassed Xie Yingying from the Xie family. The two women were both extreme beauties. As they walked together, they looked just like a pair of flowers. Having appeared together in this place, they naturally drew the attention of the crowd. From the heated yet respectful gazes from the crowd, it seemed likely that these two women stemmed from a remarkable background. Manager Su and the little miss are becoming more and more beautiful, the two of them practically look like sisters. Heh, I wonder which lucky guy will marry them in future. Such beauties, they are simply. Are you courting death? Don't you know how scary Manager Su is? I am just saying. It's just empty words. When he heard the guards at the auction talking among themselves, Lin Dong's interest was slightly piqued. It seems like these two girls belong to the 1,000 Gold Association. His gaze swept across them once before he decided to look away. After all, he was not too interested in their identities. Right now, his primary concern was to obtain some elixirs that can restore his mental energy. Therefore, his footsteps no longer paused as he walked into the inner section of the auction house. When Lin Dong entered the auction house, it seemed like there were already several people there. As he turned to glance at the crowd inside the auction, he softly muttered to himself before he took out a straw hat from his Qian Kun bag. Placing it over his head, he found a spot near the center before he sat down. Even though this place was not Qingyang town and no one should recognize him, he did not want to attract any unnecessary attention. Thus, it was best to be a little cautious. The auction had not begun yet when Lin Dong took his seat. However, he was in no hurry. Closing his eyes, he silently rested as he awaited the beginning of the auction. After closing his eyes to rest for a while, a commotion suddenly erupted behind him. This time, Lin Dong did not even have to turn his head as he had deduced that it was likely brought on by those two women from before. Hence, he could not be bothered to turn his head. However, he suddenly felt the Destiny Soul symbol in his Nuan Palace gently vibrate. This discovery caused Lin Dong to be slightly shocked. Promptly, he turned his head towards the back as his eyes swept across those two women before they finally stopped at an elderly man standing beside them, dressed in grey robes. Oh, it's him! When Lin Dong saw that grey-robed elderly man, he exclaimed in his heart. This was none other than Grand Master Ruo, who had previously given Lin Dong the first 3 chapters of Divine Movement chapter. Therefore, the reason why his mental energy undulated was likely because he and Grand Master Ruo both practiced Divine Movement chapter. As he stared at that elderly man in grey, a glint flashed in Lin Dong's eyes. However, he did not plan to go over and slowly retracted his gaze. Even though he owed Grand Master Ruo a debt of gratitude, because of the mysterious stone talisman, he always felt that it would be best to remain prudent. Just as Lin Dong retracted his gaze, that elderly man dressed in grey robes also gently gasped in surprise as he quickly scanned the crowd in the auction house. He had also felt a trace of mental energy vibration. However, after searching for a while, he did not find anything. Promptly, his eyebrows furrowed. Grand Master Ruo, what happened? Beside him, the elegant lady dressed in red asked him somewhat curiously after she witnessed this situation. Haha, it's nothing, the elderly man in grey shook his head. That sensation that he experienced previously was probably just an error on his part. With a wave of his hand, he said, the auction is about to start, let's head to the VIP booth. Yes. Towards Grand Master Ruo, even the lady, who commanded a high status in the 1,000 Gold Association, had to be respectful. Immediately, she nodded and was all smiles as she led him towards the other side of the auction house. When he saw them leave, Lin Dong stealthily heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, he could clearly feel Grand Master Ruo's mental energy sweep across his body. However, now that Lin Dong had trained at the Mind Millstones, his mental energy was exceptionally sturdy. Therefore, even Master Ruo could not detect it. Grand Master Ruo's mental energy is truly powerful. He is probably at the 3rd or 4th seal stage. Just now, when Grand Master Ruo scanned the room, Lin Dong could clearly feel the might of the former's mental energy. In the past, he had scant knowledge of mental energy, thus, like a newborn baby, he held no fear and respect towards the former. However, now that his mental energy prowess has grown, he finally understood how powerful that old man was. It was no wonder these well-respected women were so polite towards him. Dong. While these thoughts circled in Lin Dong's heart, a crisp bell sound echoed out in the auction house. Immediately, the entire place became extremely heated. Meanwhile, Lin Dong's eyes were also directed towards the auction stage. After all, he knew that the 1,000 Gold Association's auction was about to begin. This was the first time Lin Dong was going to experience an auction of this scale. Hence, deep down, he was looking forward to find out what manner of precious objects would appear. TLN, we're correcting. 1,000 Gold Merchants from Chapter 64 to 1,000 Gold Association. 1,000 Gold Merchants, 1,000 Gold Association. Chapter 105, Money Squandering Establishment. Under the fiery gazes of the crowd, a few pretty women walked up the auction stage. The one who led them was a fat middle-aged man wearing an embroidered gown, who was all smiles as he clasped his hands together respectfully towards the surrounding guests. Welcome all guests to our 1,000 Gold Auction House's auction. I hope that everyone will be able to return home satisfied today. That fatty beamed at the crowd as he gave his opening address. Yet, when he saw the somewhat impatient expressions of the crowd, he coughed out a few laughs and without further ado, he straightaway proceeded to the main part of the auction. Everyone, the first item in our auction today is provided by the head of our 1,000 Gold Association, a 4th seal symbol master, Grandmaster Ruo's work, the autumn scale sword. Behind the fatty, a servant girl presented a silver plate. On top of the silver plate was a light yellow long sword that was approximately 2 feet in length. The sword gleamed as if it was covered in numerous scales, and on its surface, rows of symbols were faintly discernible. A peculiar chill faintly pulsed from the sword. I shall not give a pointless introduction of Grandmaster Ruo, I'm sure that everyone knows of this legendary figure. This autumn scale sword was personally inscribed by Grandmaster Ruo and can be rated as an extremely sharp and powerful sword. Even an expert using Yuan power to protect his body, would find it exceedingly hard to defend against it, an extremely deadly weapon. The bid for this sword will start at 500 Yang Yuan stones. If anyone is interested, feel free to begin. After finishing his explanations, the fatty grinned as he clasped his hands towards the surrounding crowd. 500 Yang Yuan stones is equivalent to 50 Yang Yuan pills. When Lin Dong heard this price, his lips involuntarily trembled. He could tell that this so-called autumn scale sword was indeed a fine weapon. However, it was clearly not worth that price. The reason why it was so expensive, was likely due to the fact that its creator was extremely renowned. Grandmaster Ruo? It mostly likely due to that Grandmaster Ruo. To think that he was actually a 4th seal symbol master, truly a master, while he lamented at the expensive price, Lin Dong mumbled to himself. Currently, there were already quite a few people scrambling to bid for the autumn scale sword. Looks like Grandmaster Ruo's name was practically a gold-lettered signboard. Lin Dong did not hold much interest towards this autumn scale sword. After all, he was no adept with swords. Thus, even if he bought it, he would not find much use for it. This reason allowed him to calmly observe, as the price straightaway rocketed to 800 Yang Yuan stones while he constantly sighed. This first auction item finally stopped at 850 Yang Yuan stones. That fatty was evidently quite satisfied with such a price. After smiling and congratulating the winner, he quickly moved on to the next auction article. The second auction article was a type of level 3 martial arts which could not be considered as a top-tier item. Thus, the starting bid was set at 100 Yang Yuan stones. The number of bidders this time was clearly a fraction of before, and in the end, second item was sold for only 150 Yang Yuan stones. After experiencing the first few auctions, Lin Dong, who had yet to see any decent items, began to feel the novelty of the auction fade. He leaned back on his chair and once again closed his eyes to rest as he waited for the appearance of the things that he needed. The atmosphere of the auction continued to be pretty lively. After all, quite a crowd was here, and after about 10 more items were auctioned off, the resting Lin Ding finally came upon the item he needed. Void Spirit Grass, a grade 5 elixir with mental energy nourishing properties. Starting bid, 200 Yang Yuan stones. This simple introduction caused Lin Dong's tightly shut eyes to open wide as he fervently stared at the jade box on the auction stage which contained the elixir. An elixir like this would definitely be in great demand. Especially this kind of high-grade elixir. Lin Dong had never seen a grade 5 elixir before in Qingyang town, therefore, when this item was taken out, it drew many bids from the crowd. In less than a minute, the bid had already risen to 300 Yang Yuan stones. With regards to the bidders that were raising the price, Lin Dong's eyebrows slightly furrowed, but he did not immediately join in and instead calmly observed the situation. The price of the void spirit grass continued rise, yet the speed of this rise had clearly started to slow down. A while later, only 2 people were left in the bidding competition, however, the price had yet to break past the 500 Yang Yuan stone mark. 600 Yang Yuan stones. A voice abruptly sounded about the auction, causing many to be stunned for a while. Their gazes followed the voice and they found a figure wearing straw hat before quickly shifting away, not bothering too much with this new competitor. The one who had made the final bid was naturally Lin Dong. When they saw that the price had been raised by 100 Yang Yuan stones, the other 2 bidders could only resentfully seat themselves down. From Lin Dong's appearance, he was evidently rich and overbearing. It would probably be fruitless to continue to fight it out with him. After the 2 gave up, the fatty inquired 3 times before concluding the transaction. And the void spirit grass would have considered to have ended up in Lin Dong's bag. Phew! Upon the successful end to that auction, Lin Dong softly sighed. Regardless, it seems like he had finally gotten something out of the auction today. After successfully obtaining a mental energy nourishing grade 5 elixir, Lin Dong once again chose to quietly observe. Later on, he once again extravagantly made his move and used 3,500 Yang Yuan stones to successively purchase 4 grade 5 elixirs. Overall, quite a bountiful harvest indeed. Of course, this kind of harvest had been paid for with quite a substantial sum. 5 grade 5 elixirs had cost Lin Dong over 4,000 Yang Yuan stones, which was essentially 400 Yang Yuan pills. If it were not for the fact that he had used the stone talisman to refine Yang Yuan pills for himself, with just the 100 Yang Yuan pills that Lin Zhentian had passed to Lin Dong before his departure, Lin Dong could probably do nothing here but watch helplessly. Yan City is indeed incomparable to Qingyang town. In this short half an hour's time, Lin Dong had outright thrown away 400 Yang Yuan pills, even he felt a heartache at this amount. It was only here did he finally come to know what a money-squandering establishment truly was. However, as long as he was able to advance to second seal symbol master in 2 months, it would be worth it no matter how large the price. I am currently left with 600 Yang Yuan pills, looks like I'll have to use them more sparingly. Lin Dong counted the Yang Yuan pills he had left, which had shrunk to almost half its initial amount, and involuntarily licked his lips. Hehe, the next auction item is an essence level secret spirit skill. I'm sure that some symbol masters would be very interested in it. The initial bid shall start at 1,000 Yang Yuan stones. Just as Lin Dong was deciding whether it was time to leave, the voice from the auction stage caused his body, which was about to rise, to suddenly turn stiff. Essence level secret spirit skill. Under the straw hat, Lin Dong lightly licked his lips. As expected of the extremely famous auction house of Yan City. To think that an essence level secret spirit skill would actually make an appearance at this auction. Even the late Gu Ying did not possess such an item. What the current Lin Dong lacked the most was this kind of offensive mental energy skill. 1,100 Yang Yuan stones. 1,200. As he gazed at the scene, which had practically caught fire in that moment, Lin Dong's eyes slightly narrowed. Looks like there were quite a few people here who were interested in this essence level secret spirit skill. While everyone fought over that essence level secret spirit skill in the auction, a few gazes were also watching from a VIP booth to one side. I did not expect that there was actually someone who would auction off an essence level secret spirit skill. The grey-robed Grandmaster Ruo was a little astonished as he glanced at the auction while smiling. Hehe, if Grandmaster Ruo is interested, Xiansu will send someone to purchase it. Seated to one side in a red dress was a rather graceful woman who wore a sweet smile on her face as she said. It's fine. Though an essence-level secret spirit skill is not bad, to this old man, it's not a must-have item. Grandmaster Ruo chuckled as he shook his head. True, given Grandmaster Ruo's current strength, an essence-level secret spirit skill does not have much appeal. The lady in a red dress had a small smile on her lips as she replied. Grandmaster Ruo laughed in response. Just as he was about to speak again, he suddenly let out a soft gasp of surprise. He gazed towards a corner of the auction area and remarked, "This person is really wealthy, to think that he actually spent 2,500 Yang Yuan stones to purchase this essence-level secret spirit skill. From what I saw of the elixirs he had bought before, they all possess mental energy nourishing properties. Looks like this person should also be a symbol master." Upon hearing these words, the lady in red and the younger lady in green also cast their gazes towards the same corner of the auction area. That spot was exactly the one where Lin Dong was seated. This person's mental energy seems to be slightly familiar. Grandmaster Ruo watched that figure attentively as his eyebrow raised slightly. Soon after, with a nudge of his mind, a strand of mental energy swiftly flowed out and shortly approached Lin Dong's body. In the instance when his mental energy spread to Lin Dong's body, Lin Dong, who was rather happy with the fact that he had just managed to successfully procure the essence-level secret spirit skill, suddenly sensed mental energy scan his body as his expression abruptly changed. In that same instance, a trace of mental energy gushed out of Lin Dong's Nuan Palace as if it were a conditioned reflex before hastily wrapping around his body. However, when his mental energy gushed out, he already knew that he was a split second late. Now, his appearance was likely known to the owner of that strand of mental energy. While Lin Dong furrowed his eyebrows, in the VIP booth, the originally smiling Grandmaster Ruo suddenly stood up, shock thick in his eyes. That appearance of his caused the two women beside to be startled for a while. To think that it was him. TLN, in a somewhat recent chapter, not sure which one. The ranks of the secret spirit skills were revealed. After some thought about it, we've decided to change our translation of the skill ranks to the following. Normal stays as normal. E.g. Materialized Spirit Needle, which appeared in Chapter 96. Vitality Essence. Qi stays as Qi. Spirit Soul. Tai. Extremely sharp and powerful might not be the most accurate translation here, but we try XS. The actual ROS are written, which directly translates as blowing a hair across the blade and it will be cut. Cutting other high-quality swords would be equivalent to cutting through the soil usually used to describe an exceedingly powerful weapon. Here is another interesting phrase, which we directly translated as gold-lettered signboard. From what we know, shops would showcase gold-lettered signboards as an indication that their goods are a cut above the rest or superior in quality. It could also mean that they have a greater reputation or fame than others. Chapter 106, Xiansu. Master Ruo, what happened? The woman known as Xiansu was first shocked when she saw the normally calm old man lose his composure before she promptly asked. It's actually him. Grandmaster Ruo's eyes were full of astonishment as he gazed at that figure. It was as if a raging tsunami had crashed into the land known as his heart. He had recognized this person. The one who was wantonly purchasing elixirs turned out to be the youngster whom he first met in Yan City and to whom he had given the first 3 parts of Spiritual Movement Chapter 2. At the time he first saw Lin Dong, the latter was only at the earthly Yuan stage and his mental energy was, likewise, at the most basic of levels. Due to the fact that Grandmaster Ruo treasured mental energy talent, he had taken the initiative to pass the first 3 parts of Spiritual Movement Chapter to Lin Dong. Yet, Grandmaster Ruo had never expected that the youth who was unable to even sense mental energy when they first met had now grown to such a level. In that brief moment of probing from before, Grandmaster Ruo's mental energy had interacted with Lin Dong's mental energy. In that instance, the former could clearly feel how powerful the latter's mental energy had become. It was very likely that the latter had already unlocked his own Nuan Palace. Based on Master Ruo's current strength, unlocking one's Nuan Palace, or even a first seal or second seal symbol master would be nothing for him to be astonished about. However, Lin Dong was different. Just months before, he was someone who had no inkling of what mental energy was, and yet, in a few months, this novice had transformed into a true symbol master. This insane rate of progress caused even a renowned person like Grandmaster Ruo to be shocked. After all, even he took several years to finally cross over to that stage that Lin Dong had taken less than 1/10 of that time to reach. His talent was simply out of the world. Master Ruo knows this person. To one side, a beautiful, yet somewhat indifferent lady dressed in green asked in a surprised tone. Like the other lady, it was the first time she had seen this old man lose his composure. I do. At that moment, Grandmaster Ruo slowly regained his composure as he stared at that figure in the auction area with a peculiar glint in his eyes and softly said, "The current him should be a true blue symbol master." Oh! After hearing this, the lady in green slightly lifted her eyebrows before she promptly lost some of her initial interest. Though there was not an overabundance of ordinary symbol masters in the 1,000 Gold Association, there were still quite a number of them. Therefore, such a revelation was really not very noteworthy. Furthermore, although this person seemed talented, it was likely that he had just recently unlocked his Nuan Palace, someone who could not even be considered as a first seal symbol master. In fact, he would probably be unable to beat even a Heavenly Yuan early stage expert. Haha, Master Ruo, is there anything special about this symbol master? The red-clad Xiansu gently smiled as she asked. She was clearly a highly insightful individual, as she knew that an ordinary symbol master could not possibly cause Grandmaster Ruo to lose himself in such a way. An ordinary symbol master is indeed nothing to be amazed about. However, just a few months ago, that brat did not even know what a symbol master was. Master Ruo smiled in an indifferent manner as he said. He had only been training his mental energy for a few months. When they heard these words, Xiansu and the lady in green understood. They were rather knowledgeable about symbol masters, yet they had never heard of anyone who managed to advance from a newbie to a true symbol master in such a short time. When I first met this fellow at Mysterious Objects Mall, I wanted him to be my disciple, however, I was turned down. Grandmaster Ruo laughed. He had seldom been rejected, therefore when he mentioned this fact, his expression turned slightly sour. Of course, besides his expression, even Xiansu and the lady in green were surprised. In Yan City, countless symbol masters were dying to become Grandmaster Ruo's discipline. Yet this person actually dared to reject him. One wonders if he had an extraordinary background or if he was just a fool. When he left, I passed him the first 3 parts of Spiritual Movement chapter. Judging by his talent, I had thought at first that he would probably take at least a year before he could unlock his Nuan Palace. However, right now, it seems like he had already reached that step, Grandmaster Ruo somewhat regretfully said. Based on Master Ruo's words, it seems like this person is a rather good seedling. Xiansu was full of interest as she spoke. She was one who preferred to take the long-term perspective into account when handling matters. If that person below was as talented as Grandmaster Ruo claimed, he would become a legendary figure in the future. If they could rope such a figure into their 1,000 Gold Association, he would perhaps become a huge help. Who knows? There are so many talented individuals in this world. It is not so easy for them to reach their full potential. Aunt Su, don't tell me you plan to recruit him. The lady dressed in green pursed her fair lips, openly showing a trace of haughtiness. Girl, you are too proud and arrogant. Don't be so quick to look down on others. If you keep thinking that way, you will eventually lose out. Xiansu rolled her eyes at the lady in green before she gently flicked the latter's forehead with her slim fingers as she said in a resigned manner. Haha, Xiansu, regarding the battle over the Celestial Pool, does our 1,000 Gold Association still lack a member? Grandmaster Ruo stared at the auction area before him as he suddenly chuckled and said. Yes, we still lack a member. At first, we planned to give that position to Song Qing. However, that girl's Hylan would rather be beaten to death than cooperate with that fellow. Xiansu replied as she nodded her head. Promptly, a glint flashed in her eyes as she inquired, Grandmaster Ruo means to let that person take the position. Aunt Su, that battle for the celestial pool is very important. You can't pick anyone who will just end up dragging us down. Besides, that person had only just unlocked his Nuan palace, hence his powers are limited. When she heard these words, the lady in green hastily interjected. Then shall we let Song Qing be your partner? Xiansu had a small smile on her lips as she said. No way. I would rather go solo than be partnered with that bastard. When she heard Song Qing's name, the lady dressed in green, who had been called Hylan, immediately frowned as undisguised disgust surfaced in her eyes. Haha, don't worry Hylan. This old man has good judgment. The talent displayed by that fellow is definitely the top 3 among all the talented youths I have seen over the years. He should be capable enough. Besides, the battle for the celestial pool is fast approaching, and since you refuse to work with Song Qing, we can only make do. Grandmaster Ruo laughed as he said. Since Grandmaster Ruo says so, let's invite this gentleman over for a chat. If he is willing to represent our 1000 Gold Association for this celestial pool battle, we will definitely reward him lavishly. Xiansu slightly smiled and suggested as she gently pulled at the sulking's Hylan. Agreed. Grandmaster Ruo stroked his beard as he lightly nodded. Inside the auction area, Lin Dong had been feeling a little uneasy ever since he realized that his looks had been scanned by that thread of mental energy. After lingering at the auction area for a while and he not finding any items that appealed to him, he immediately got up and walked towards the auction area's exit. However, just as Lin Dong was about to leave the auction area, an arm suddenly extended from one side as a slightly scrawny-looking middle-aged man approached him with a smile. Sir, may we trouble you for some of your time? Our manager has invited you over. As he gazed at the middle-aged man standing before him, Lin Dong slightly furrowed his eyebrows. He stealthily scanned his surroundings and realized that a dozen other men were slowly approaching. These men had strong auras and their footsteps were very steady. Evidently, they were all rather skilled. Lead the way. Lin Dong's gaze slightly flashed before he calmly nodded. Based on this welcome, it seems like the person that wanted to meet him was fairly reputable. These elite bodyguards were much more powerful than the Blood Cloth sect members. Furthermore, after that thread of mental energy probed him previously, he had vaguely guessed who he would be meeting. When he saw that Lin Dong did not resist, the smile on that middle-aged man's face turned kinder. Promptly, he swiftly turned and to lead Lin Dong. Lin Dong followed behind as they passed through a corridor before finally entering a lavishly decorated room. Immediately, as he had expected, the smiling face of an elderly grey-robed man appeared before his eyes. Haha, my friend, we meet again. When he saw Lin Dong enter the room, Grandmaster Ruo slightly smiled as he said. It seems like I was found out in the end. Upon hearing what was said, Lin Dong involuntarily could not help but let out a bitter laugh. He removed the straw hat from his head and faced the elderly man as he clasped his hands together. Lin Dong respectfully greets the Grandmaster. Hehe, this brat is indeed a remarkable youth. At this age, he has already become a symbol master. It seems like he has a bright future ahead. In the room, a woman dressed in red curiously sized up Lin Dong before she charmingly smiled and commented. Beside her, Hylan glanced at Lin Dong before she withdrew her gaze with a trace of laziness. Could I inquire as to why these 3 esteemed individuals have summoned a youngster such as me? Lin Dong knew that these 3 individuals before him were all of significant status in Yan City. Thus, without further ado, he immediately asked them. Lin Dong, my friend, you should have mastered the first 3 parts of Spiritual Movement chapter that I passed to you, right? Grandmaster Ruo had a smile on his as he asked. Indeed. Lin Dong humbly scratched his head and nodded. He had already fully mastered the first 3 parts of Spiritual Movement chapter months ago. This person is the manager of the 1000 Gold Auction House. You can call her Manager Su. She is the one in charge of the whole auction house. This other lady is of utmost importance to the president of the Thousand Gold Association, Xia's Hailan. Master Ruo introduced the other two to Lin Dong. Lin Dong lightly nodded his head. However, he did not lose his composure. First, he had already suspected that these two were of a prominent background. Second, they did not have much relation to him. Thus after he glanced at them, he turned back to look at Grandmaster Ruo. After all, he knew that these people did not approach him for no reason. Towards Lin Dong's undisturbed expression, Xiansu did not mind much and only sweetly laughed in response. While the lady in green's eyebrows slightly knitted together. The reason we invited you over was because we have a request. After Grandmaster Ruo finished with his pleasantries, he returned to the main topic. He looked towards Lin Dong, smiling as he said, "My friend, currently, you should have unlocked your Nuan Palace, right? If you agree to help us, I can aid you in condensing a destiny symbol." When he heard these words, Lin Dong's facial expression turned a little strange. After he considered how to reply for a while, he softly said, "Grandmaster Ruo, even though I don't know what exactly is your request. However, with regards to the destiny symbol, I have already condensed it." Inside the room, that youngster's voice gently echoed out as the smiles on Grandmaster Ruo's, Xiansu's, and Hailan's face immediately turned stiff. Chapter 107, Celestial Dan Pool. You have already condensed a destiny symbol. In the room which had turned deathly quiet, Grandmaster Ruo's voice rang out as disbelief surfaced on his face. Unlocking one's Nuan Palace was an integral step in mental energy cultivation, while condensing a destiny symbol was the most important step of all. Even Grandmaster Ruo, who held high hopes for Lin Dong, had never expected that in a few short months, the latter had not only unlocked his Nuan Palace but in addition condensed a destiny symbol. Even with an old man's wealth of experience, the news still caused him to lose his calm demeanor in a flash. Shock also bubbled up in Manager Su's and Xia's Hailan's eyes. Even the rather prideful Xia's Hailan now viewed him in a different light. A first seal symbol master possessed the ability to contend against a heavenly UN stage expert, a level of strength that was worthy enough for her to re-evaluate her judgment. Furthermore, even a haughty person like her could not help but acknowledge that this mental energy potential was rather terrifying. Hehe, Master Ruo, it seems like your appraisal is extremely accurate. Xiansu's bountiful bust gently swelled as if trying to suppress the shock in her heart. Moments later, she then turned to look at Lin Dong with a peculiar glint in her eyes as she sweetly smiled. You had a method to condense the destiny symbol. Grandmaster Ruo was still in slight denial as he stared at Lin Dong and asked. Thanks to a series of fortunate events, I managed to procure a method to condense the destiny symbol. Lin Dong softly replied. Promptly, with a flick of his mind, a wave of mental energy emerged and crystallized into a destiny symbol with an odd luster. He was not worried that his destiny soul symbol might be recognized. After all, if the symbol did not warp itself, nobody could tell if it was any different. It is indeed a destiny symbol. When he saw the symbol made from mental energy, the doubt in Grandmaster Ruo's and the two ladies' eyes completely dissipated. We have completely underestimated you. It has not even been a year since you started mental energy cultivation and yet you have reached the first seal symbol master level. The amount of talent and potential you possess surpasses anyone I have ever known. Grandmaster Ruo stroked his beard as he sincerely exclaimed. Grandmaster Ruo is too kind. I was just lucky. Lin Dong chuckled as he recalled his destiny symbol. Haha, Xiansu, right now both of you should have no doubts regarding the strength of this young one, right? Since he is a first seal symbol master, there should not be much difference between his and Song Qing's strength. Grandmaster Ruo looked at the two women behind him as he smiled and said. Yes. This time, not only was the red-clad lady in complete agreement, even that slightly colder lady in green was forced to acknowledge this fact. Grandmaster Ruo, what is the matter you approached me for? I am not that powerful, thus I am afraid I can't be of much assistance. Lin Dong remained calm and collected as he looked to Grandmaster Ruo and spoke. He, young one. It is not good to be too humble. A wave of a fragrance assaulted his senses as Lin Dong gazed at the beauty approaching him. Manager Su's facial features were indeed exceedingly beautiful. At least, she was the most beautiful lady that Lin Dong had ever met. Her mature and elegant charm was truly soul-enrapturing. After a glance at her, he immediately lowered his eyes. Have you ever heard of Celestial Dan Pool? Xian Su looked at the young man before her as she said. I haven't. Lin Dong honestly shook his head. When she saw Lin Dong's response, Xian Su suddenly went mute. Soon after, she gently chuckled, not minding it as she continued, this so-called Celestial Dan Pool is actually an exceedingly rare natural formation. These Celestial Dan Pools contain an extremely pure yin and yang energy. If one is able to absorb the energy within, not only would one be able to swiftly congeal a Yuan Dan, but the Yuan Dan formed will also be at least 6 stars. Oh! Lin Dong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He never knew that there was such a miraculous thing in this world. Since it allowed one to swiftly advance to Yuan Dan stage, it would definitely be highly coveted. Deep in the mountains on the east side of Yan City, our Thousand Gold Association discovered a Celestial Dan Pool. However, at the same time, men from the Blood Wolf Gang also discovered it. When she mentioned the Blood Wolf Gang, the smile on her face slightly weakened. Evidently, there was a significant grudge between the two parties. The Celestial Dan Pool has limited benefits for elite Yuan Dan practitioners. However, for younger generation members at Heavenly Yuan stage, it is practically a godsend. Therefore, both factions are very keen to acquire this Celestial Dan Pool. Lin Dong silently nodded. If this Celestial Dan Pool really had such a miraculous effect, then whoever managed to absorb the energy within would practically give their faction another Yuan Dan stage practitioner, substantially increasing the power of their faction. Furthermore, the person would possess a high-quality Yuan Dan and his or her strength would surely surpass that of an ordinary Yuan Dan practitioner. Thus, even though the Thousand Gold Association and the Blood Wolf Gang were amongst the 3 top factions in Yan City, neither was willing to give up on this Celestial Dan Pool. Though this Celestial Dan Pool is truly magical, there is no way for it to be shared between both parties. For this reason, our Thousand Gold Association and the Blood Wolf Gang have fought over this issue. In the end, we negotiated and proposed a Celestial Dan Pool duel. Simply put, this Celestial Dan Pool duel is a battle. However, for this duel, both factions will nominate 3 individuals for which there is a restriction. That is, we can only send out younger generation members. This is the reason why we have approached you. Xian Su gently smiled as she said. You want me to represent you and fight for the Celestial Dan Pool? Lin Dong furrowed his eyebrows before he promptly shook his head and said, the Thousand Gold Association is powerful and massive. It should be a simple feat to find someone stronger than me. I think it's best we drop this issue. You are too humble. Based on your current strength, even amongst the younger generation members in Yan City, you can definitely be considered the top few. Initially, we had already planned our roster. However, one of the members, Zhailan, was strongly opposed. Therefore, we had no choice but to try this last-minute swap. Xian Su was a person who could commanded this large auction house. She was naturally experienced and wise in the ways of the world. When she heard Lin Dong's words, she immediately understood that this youngster before her was merely fishing for a reward first. Instantly, she chuckled before speaking, if you want any rewards, feel free to ask. A first seal symbol master was able to match up against a Heavenly Yuan middle stage expert. Amongst the younger generation, his strength was considered impressive. Thus, she was reluctant to let him go. When he heard the word reward, Lin Dong's eyes slightly narrowed before he turned silent for a while. Suddenly, he gave his reply, sure, as long as I am allowed to soak in that Celestial Dan Pool once we are done. That Celestial Dan Pool was truly a magical natural formation. Therefore, its powers caused even someone like Lin Dong to be highly interested. After all, this opportunity was not something that he could buy with Yang Yuan stones alone. You are too greedy. There is only a limited amount of energy in the Celestial Dan Pool. How can we simply let anyone soak in it? When she heard these words, Xilan, who was standing nearby, involuntarily shouted out in a frosty voice. Furthermore, this time we are merely asking you to make up the numbers. If we attain 2 consecutive victories in the first 2 rounds, then perhaps you don't even need to show yourself for the final round. If so, how can we possibly allow you to soak in the celestial Dan pool? Lin Dong's face was calm as he glanced at Xia's Hylan. Promptly, he turned to look at Xiansu, whose eyebrows were now slightly furrowed, and said, "If I do not have to fight, then can do without the compensation. However, what if you fail to emerge victorious in the first 2 rounds?" Xia's Hylan was dumbstruck and at a loss for words. If it were so easy to deal with these Blood Wolf gang members, their 1,000 Gold Association would not have such a hard time looking for a suitable member. The energy in the Celestial Dan pool is limited. However, if you make a significant contribution during the Celestial Dan pool duel, we can consider your request. Xiansu was silent for a moment before she slowly said, "Aunt Su." When she realized the meaning behind Xiansu's words, Xilan immediately shouted out. However, the former turned and glared at her, causing her to reluctantly shut her mouth. When he heard these words, a smile surfaced on Lin Dong's face. He could tell that this Xia's Hylan was at Heavenly Yuan late stage. In a manner of speaking, she was considered quite powerful. Therefore, it seems like the younger generation members in the Blood Wolf gang should be around her level as well. However, to Lin Dong, who had killed Gu Ying previously, these opponents should not be much trouble. "Haha, you brat! You actually managed to force Xiansu to concede. What a rare sight!" After he witnessed the negotiations conclude, Grandmaster Ruo could not help but shake his head as he smiled and said. Lin Dong released a dry laugh. This was a rare opportunity after all. If he did not make full use of it, he would never have a chance to enjoy this magical celestial Dan pool. To one side, Xia's Hylan gave a stared daggers at Lin Dong. She clearly never expected that this decent-looking fellow was actually so devious. "When will the competition commence?" Ignoring her gaze, Lin Dong looked straight at Susu and asked. "In 3 days' time." Xiansu lightly smiled as she continued, "If you would like to, during this period of time, you can stay with us at the 1,000 Gold Association. Also, if you require anything, feel free to ask." "No need. In 3 days, I will come back here to find you." Lin Dong shook his head. He had his own secrets to hide, and since there were many people here at the 1,000 Gold Association, he was afraid of the consequences should his secret be unveiled. Furthermore, he wanted to use these 3 days to practice the secret spirit skill that he just purchased. That way, he would have another hidden ace up his sleeve. After finishing these words, Lin Dong briefly discussed strategies with Xiansu and the other 2 before he took the initiative and left. "Aunt Su, are you really agreeing to let that brat enter the Celestial Dan pool? The amount of energy inside the Celestial Dan pool is only sufficient for a few people." As she gazed at Lin Dong's departing figure, Xia's Hylan somewhat regretfully asked. "Haha, back to what I said before. It all depends on his contribution. If you do not want to share with him, shouldn't you just strive for 2 consecutive victories?" Xiansu smiled in an indifferent as she replied. Upon hearing these words, Xia's Hylan gently gritted her teeth. With a soft chuckle, "All right, at that time, I will make him understand that he merely here to make up the numbers. Humph, that brat really thinks he's something." To one side, upon hearing her snort, Xiansu involuntarily smiled. Her beautiful eyes lingered at the spot where Lin Dong had disappeared. In her heart, she felt that this fellow was probably highly skilled. Whether he is a donkey or a horse, we shall find out in 3 days. Chapter 108, Piercing Heli City. When Lin Dong left the 1,000 Gold auction house, he did not make another more stops. However, for safety reasons, he did not immediately return to the inn where he was resting. Instead, he chooses to travel around the city for half a day, before he leisurely returned to the inn. After returning to the inn, Lin Dong casually filled his belly before he instructed the inn owner not to disturb him and tightly shut his room door. Once he entered his room, Lin Dong hurriedly retrieved 5 jade boxes from his Qian bag. When he opened them, an alluring fragrance immediately drifted out as a dim light glow coiled around the elixirs. Based on their appearance alone, Lin Dong knew that these elixirs were much better than the grade 4 elixirs that he bought in Qingyang town. Lin Dong was smiling widely as he stared at today's bountiful harvest. Yan City was truly remarkable compared to Qingyang town. Back home, he would find it extremely difficult to find such high-quality elixirs, though the prices of these items were naturally exorbitant. As Lin Dong slowly extended out his right palm, a mysterious light shot out from his palm and interweaved itself on one of the elixirs. Soon after, the elixir began to rapidly transform. Approximately 10 minutes later, they had turned into 5 perfectly round elixir pills. As expected of a grade 5 elixir. Even the stone talisman requires such a long time to refine them. As he stared at the rich elixir pills in his palm, Lin Dong softly exclaimed. Previously, when he was refining elixirs, it would be complete in an extremely short time. However, this was the first time he needed more than 10 minutes to refine them. After he successfully refined the first grade 5 elixir, Lin Dong decided to refine the remaining 4 elixirs as well. In the end, these elixirs were turned into 25 elixir pills. As he stared at the elixir pills that had been stored in a jade bottle, Lin Dong nodded his head in satisfaction. After the stone talisman had refined them, all the medicinal power in these elixirs were now perfectly distributed into these pills. The benefits stemming from consuming 1 grade 5 elixir was equivalent to consuming just 2 elixir pills. Since 1 elixir could be refined into 5 pills, this meant that thanks to the stone talisman, Lin Dong was able to fully absorb the maximum amount of medicinal power from these elixirs. Let's first test out how effective these pills are. Lin Dong licked his lips, before he straightaway sat on his bed with his legs crossed and once again ventured into the stone talisman's spiritual domain. The enormous mind millstones continued their slow rotation. In the spot where these 2 millstones interacted, Lin Dong's mental energy was once again in the cycle of being torn apart and then restored again. This cycle continued on until the 10th time, before Lin Dong's tightly shut eyes gradually began to open. His face was exceptionally pale and a dizzying sensation continuously gushed out in his brain. A prickly numbing sensation caused the muscles all over Lin Dong's body to twitch faintly. It seems like today's mind millstone cultivation session had caused his body to become extremely feeble. Removing an elixir pill that he refined previously from the jade bottle, Lin Dong quickly stuffed it into his mouth before slowly shutting his eyes, allowing the warm medicinal power to begin its rapid spread throughout his body. A slightly chilly sensation began to slowly flow through the inner channels in his body. Finally, just like how a steam ascends, traces of medicinal effect began to flow into his Nuan palace. When the ice-cold qi flowed into his Nuan palace, the dizzying sensation in his brain swiftly dissipated. Meanwhile, the feeble sensation in his body also began to fade. About an hour later, when all the medicinal power had been absorbed into his Nuan palace, Lin Dong began to open his eyes, now full of energy. Plastered on his face was a hard-to-conceal delight. The effect of the elixir pill had vastly exceeded his expectations. The grueling session at the mind millstones and the act of consuming an elixir pill perfectly complemented each other. Therefore, after merely 1 cultivation session, the destiny symbol in his Nuan palace sparkled. Compared to before, it also seemed more solid. Phew! With a delighted expression, Lin Dong deeply inhaled. Previously, when he did not have any grade 5 elixir pills, in one day, he could at most endure 10 cycles at the mind millstones before he was forced to rest. Only on the second day could he continue on this process. However, right now, after he consumed this grade 5 elixir pill, Lin Dong could increase the efficiency of this process by several times. For example, currently, after consuming the grade 5 elixir pill to recover, even though he was not at his peak condition, it was sufficient for him to once again return to the mind millstones and temper himself. As such, it was evident that these grade 5 elixir pills are indeed extremely potent. After all, you get what you pay for. Again. Sensing that his condition had greatly improved, Lin Dong's spirits were once again revived as he deeply shouted with a fervent expression in his eyes and actually re-entered the stone talisman spiritual domain. In just half a day, Lin Dong had endured 30 full cycles of being blown apart and then revived again. This kind of torturous training caused even the small Martin to be stupefied as the word lunatic was constantly mumbled. These 30 cycles finally caused Lin Dong to feel thoroughly exhausted. After the third repetition, Lin Dong could still feel a numbing sensation from his mind even after he consumed an elixir pill. He knew that he had reached his limit. If he forcefully continued to train, he would only hurt himself. Once he reached this stage, Lin Dong was forced to stop with this maniac-like training. Even with the aid of grade 5 elixir pills, it seems like based on Lin Dong's current standards, he could only endure at most 30 cycles a day. Nonetheless, compared to before, this was 3 times more efficient. Therefore, the result was pretty satisfactory. When Lin Dong noted this point, he began to calm down. After all, there is a limit to everything, and the same applied to training as well. This principle was something Lin Dong understood. After concluding his training at the Mind Millstones, Lin Dong proceeded to retrieve a jade disc-like object from his Qian Kun bag. This was the essence-level secret spirit skill that he had purchased during the auction. There were some symbols inscribed on the jade disc. After Lin Dong's gaze swept over them, he understood that contained within this jade was a weak pulse of mental energy. Right now, even though he was still somewhat a novice, with a flick of his mind, a thread of mental energy floated out from his Nuan palace and entered the jade disc. As Lin Dong's mental energy entered, a stream of information swiftly gushed out from within the jade disc and flowed into Lin Dong's mind. Piercing Helicity, Essence-Level Secret Spirit Skill. The name of this secret spirit skill was slightly odd. However, after Lin Dong carefully studied it for a while, he gained a better understanding of it. This so-called Piercing Helicity was actually a special mental energy shock wave. In particular, this mental energy shockwave had a unique frequency, and this made it even more deadly. However, if one wanted to master this special frequency, it was evidently going to be an uphill battle. Inside his room, Lin Dong was deep in thought. A long while later, a stream of mental energy abruptly gushed out from his Nuan palace. At the instance when it gushed out, with a flick of his mind, that mental energy shock wave was swiftly came under his control. Soon after, it changed according to that unique frequency. As the frequency changed, the formless mental energy shock wave also began to change. In the blink of an eye, the formless mental energy actually materialized into a cone-like mental energy attack that was as thick as one's thigh. Compared to before, this mental energy shock wave not only possessed a shape, but it was also in the form of a sharp-tipped cone. The sharp tip swirled like a spiral. At one glance, one could tell that it was indeed deadly. However, right now, the one major defect was that its shape seemed too illusionary, as it only had form but lacked substance. Of course, since Lin Dong had just learnt this Piercing Helicity, the fact that he could accomplish this step was already a remarkable achievement. Once he became more proficient, its effect would surely be much better. Inside the room, Lin Dong was evidently highly interested in this Piercing Helicity, as he continuously dispersed it before materializing it again in order to quickly master that unique frequency. As he happily drilled, the form of that Piercing Helicity gradually began to materialize. In the following 3 days, Lin Dong practically did not leave the room. All of his time was used to temper his mental energy and to practice the essence-level secret spirit skill that he had recently acquired, Piercing Helicity. In just 3 days, thanks to Lin Dong's insane training, he had used up nearly 1/3 of his precious 25 grade 5 elixir pills. Fortunately, the progress at this rate of consumption was rather good. Currently, the destiny symbol in Lin Dong's Nuan palace had materialized till the point where it was almost an actual object. Lin Dong could clearly feel a powerful energy rapidly condensing within his destiny symbol. Furthermore, right in the middle of the seemingly material destiny symbol, a tiny crack was faintly discernible. This was not a defect but rather an indication that one was approaching the pinnacle of a first seal symbol master. When this crack fully splits open, this destiny symbol would split itself into two. At that time, one would have advanced to the level of a second seal symbol master. As for piercing Helicity, Lin Dong had likewise become more proficient with it. Even though he had not tested how powerful it was, he imagined that it would be several times stronger than materialized spirit needle. Therefore, this skill would definitely be his hidden signature move. When the morning of the fourth day arrived, Lin Dong, who was in tip-top shape after a planned rest, slowly opened his eyes as a piercing ray of light flitted across his eyes before disappearing. Looks like it's time. Lin Dong leapt off his bed. Today marked the beginning of the Celestial Pool battle. Although he was not certain if the Thousand Gold Association could defeat the Blood Wolf Gang, he was extremely drawn to the magical effects of the Celestial Dan Pool. He knew that if he had the opportunity to soak in it and absorb the pure yin and yang energy within, perhaps he would successfully break through to Yuan Dan stage shortly. If he could advance to Yuan Dan stage, with the aid of his mental energy, even Wei Tong, whom he previously found exceedingly difficult to deal with, would no longer be a threat. At that time, he would be equipped with the power to protect himself even in Yan City. After experiencing the blood cloth sect crisis, Lin Dong clearly understood in his heart that if he wanted to protect things in this world, what he needed was power. It was due to this particular reason that he agreed to fulfill the member quota for the Thousand Gold Association and help them contest for the Celestial Dan Pool. Chapter 109, Song Qing. Yan City, Thousand Gold Association. I told you, we have a better candidate now. Therefore, you don't need to participate in the Celestial Pool battle. In a large hall within the association, Xia's Hylan gazed at a young man dressed in blue as she icily said. Hylan, I know that you have some misgivings about me, however now that the Celestial Pool battle is about to begin, even though I cannot be considered top tier among the younger generation members in Yan City, I am not someone who can be so easily replaced. Now is not the time for your tantrums. That feminine-looking young man's face sunk slightly upon hearing Xia's Hylan's words. Yet soon after, a smile emerged on his face as he glanced at the alluring figure of that woman before him from the corner of his eyes. Deep in his eyes was a tinge of lust. Even though she did not manage to spot the trace of lust the young man had concealed, Xia's Hylan still gave him a death stare. She knew that this fellow had a dirty past. Therefore, she had never liked him since the start. In fact, to be honest, she felt disgusted by him. Song Qing, just forget about it this time. I will explain this matter to your father. Xian Su, who was standing aside, gently smiled as she softly said. When he saw her speak, the corners of Song Qing's eyes slightly twitched. He lowered his head and stared at the ample amount of jade-like thigh that was revealed under Xian Su's skirt. Instantly, a lustful fire gushed up in his abdomen. However, he knew exactly how powerful this person in front of him was, therefore he did not dare to look at her directly in fear that he would be noticed. Promptly, he turned his gaze and looked at the two elderly men sitting to one side. Oh Xian Su, don't you think this matter was handled too rashly? After all, didn't we agree to let Song Qing fill the last spot? How can we just randomly find someone else to make up the numbers? If that person loses his duel during the Celestial Pool duel, it would be very difficult to explain. One of the two elderly men, who were both dressed in yellow robes, glanced at Song Qing before he placed down the teacup in his hand as he smiled and directed these words at Xian Su. How about we let Song Qing participate? After all, everyone knows how capable he is. The other man smiled as he said. Slightly smiling, Xian Su replied, Managers, the reason why we changed our lineup was not due to any personal reasons. This duel is extremely important, thus everything we are doing is for the sake of securing our victory. If we can increase the odds of our victory, I would not hesitate to replace Evans Hylan with a better candidate. The meaning behind her words were clear. The reason why they substituted Song Qing was not because they were prejudiced against him, but rather because they had a better candidate. When they heard these words, the two elderly men slightly furrowed their eyebrows. Evidently, they were not convinced by her argument. They exchanged a gaze before suddenly laughing and speaking, since Manger Su has said so, then it looks like your new candidate is indeed quite skilled. Since these two old men are quite free now, how about we wait here for a while to observe how exactly the new candidate is superior to Song Qing. However, Manger Su, a great deal is at stake. If that new candidate is not as skilled as you said, then please return to the original lineup. We do not wish for our 1000 Gold Association to lose to the Blood Wolf Gang over some petty personal issues. Hehe, I am curious to find out who is this person that is so highly valued by Manager Su. A malicious glint flashed in Song Qing's eyes as he promptly chuckled before withdrawing and seating himself to one side. When she saw the trio's actions, Xian Su's black eyebrows gently furrowed. Soon after, she elegantly raised her teacup, a calm expression on her face. To one side, a flash of worry surfaced in Hyland's beautiful eyes. Based on their expressions, these guys were evidently planning to wait for Lin Dong's arrival and test his skills. If Lin Dong's performance was lackluster, they would probably use that as an excuse to remove him. Even though she was a little worried, Xia's Hyland had no other option. After all, these two elderly men were considered elders in the 1000 Gold Association and so held considerable sway in the association. Therefore, if the elders managed to find any weakness today, Song Qing's removal from the team might end up impossible. Sigh, we can only hope that fellow will be a little more dependable. As she gently sighed in her heart, Xia's Hyland had no choice but to sit down and await Lin Dong's arrival. They did not have to wait for long. Approximately half an hour later, a guard came forward to report. When Lin Dong walked into that large hall, he immediately felt a weird atmosphere. As he scanned his surroundings, he first saw Xianzi and Xia's Hyland before his gaze stopped at the trio beside them. Amongst the trio, two were elderly men while the other person looked about 20 years old. Dressed in blue, the younger man's face seemed somewhat feminine yet somewhat sinister. At this moment, a cold glint flashed in the latter's eyes, like a deadly snake. He was staring straight at Lin Dong. Upon seeing this situation, Lin Dong began to feel slightly troubled. Manager Swansu, this is the so-called better candidate? He doesn't seem any special. The two elderly men casually glanced at Lin Dong as they uttered in an indifferent manner. Lin Dong, these two are the managers from the 1000 Gold Association while this man is the young master of Yan City's Song family, Song Qing. Xian Su's jade-like hand gently swayed as she smiled and introduced them. Song Qing. When he heard this name, Lin Dong finally understood why that person was staring at him viciously. That was because he was the unlucky bastard that Lin Dong had replaced. My name is Song Qing, a member of Yan City's Song family. My friend, you seem foreign, I am guessing you are not from Yan City, right? Song Qing stood up and approached Lin Dong as he clasped his hands together and smiled. Just as a smile emerged on Song Qing's face, without waiting for Lin Dong's reply, a soft yet cold mosquito-esque voice immediately echoed in Lin Dong's ears. I don't care where you are from, but this young master here will give you some kind advice. You should wisen up and tell Manager Su that you will give up your spot. I will make sure that you are generously compensated. Or else, next time you handle affairs in Yan City, you had better watch out. As he stared at that malicious young face in front of him, Lin Dong remained calm. Turning to look at Xian Su, he asked, Manager Su, when are we leaving? When he saw that Lin Dong had blatantly ignored his warning, Song Qing was momentarily stunned. Immediately, a malevolent glint surfaced in his eyes. Young one, it is not such a simple matter to represent our 1000 Gold Association, one of the elderly men mocked in an icy voice. Manager Su, I know that this matter is extremely important to the 1000 Gold Association, thus my actions are all for the good of the association. If this man is indeed better than me as you claimed, then I will automatically give up. Song Qing turned around and faced Xianzi as he respectfully said. Meanwhile the hideous expression on his face instantly disappeared. What do you plan on doing? Xia's Hyland furrowed her eyebrows as she asked. Hehe, it's pointless to debate over who is the better candidate. How about they exchange blows to find out who is better? The other elderly man sipped on his hot tea as he smiled and said. You. When she heard that these guys were planning to make a move, Xilan's eyebrows slightly lifted. To one side, Xian Su's eyebrows were also slightly knitted together. Suddenly, her beautiful eyes turned towards Lin Dong. Since Lin Dong was a first seal symbol master, he should probably match up against Song Qing, who was at Heavenly Yuan early stage. However, she was worried that a mishap may occur. It's all up to Manager Su. As he glanced at her beautiful eyes, Lin Dong calmly said. In that case, let's have a friendly duel. Remember not to go too far. Upon witnessing this situation, Xian Su was forced to nod her head as she declared. Boom! Just as Xian Su's words landed, a powerful Yuan power almost instantaneously burst out from Song Qing's body. Immediately, a powerful punch was flashed towards Lin Dong's chest. His attack obviously was meant to catch the latter off guard. Shameless! When she saw Song Qing's action, Xia's Highland's face instantly turned slightly icy. Yet, as he faced Song Qing's sudden and vicious attack, Lin Dong's facial expression did not change. His body did not move as he allowed that powerful attack to continue. Bang! Just as Song Qing's fist was half an inch away from Lin Dong, that powerful punch was suddenly stopped as a deep sound echoed out. It seemed like a formless wall was shielding Lin Dong. Mental energy. Upon witnessing this sight, Song Qing was slightly shocked. Promptly, an icy expression surfaced in his face as an even more powerful Yuan power subsequently gushed forward. Heavenly Yuan middle stage. When they sensed the powerful undulation emerging from Song Qing, Xian Su's and Xia's Highland's expression changed slightly. They never expected that this Song Qing had broken through to Heavenly Yuan middle stage. That sudden surge in Yuan power allowed Song Qing's punch to directly blast apart Lin Dong's mental energy barrier. Immediately, a cold glint flashed in Song Qing's sleeves as a sharp blade stealthily slipped in his palm and was viciously directed towards Lin Dong's throat. Lin Dong's face was impassive as he stared at the now hideous expression on Song Qing's face while the latter attacked. Lin Dong did not intend to waste any time with his opponent. Abruptly, he took a step forward as an unusually vigorous mental energy gushed out from his Nuan palace. Like a tidal wave, it viciously slammed against Song Qing's Yuan power-clad body. Boom! Thanks to Lin Dong's terrifying mental energy attack, the Yuan power defending Song Qing's body instantaneously crumbled as an intense pain emerged inside his head. Meanwhile, in front of Xian Su's, Highland's, and the rest's bewildered gazes, his body instantly flew back, as if he had been struck by a giant sledgehammer, before he finally slammed heavily against a wall inside the giant hall. As his ragged figure fell to the ground, he immediately spat out a mouth of fresh blood. Lin Dong's move was practically as quick as a lightning. In fact, one could argue that he did not even make a move. After all, from start to end, all Lin Dong did was take a step forward. However, the mental energy attack that accompanied that one step, was able to directly finish off Song Qing, who was at Heavenly Yuan middle stage. A clear-cut victory. As she stared at that young man in the large hall, Xia's Highland's beautiful eyes flashed as she softly exclaimed, "This fellow does have some ability."